Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Now, we're talking a lot about
Mondays with
truth
Mike.
and how to arrive at conclusions. We should perhaps segue into the next topic, which is your topic. Yeah, do you want to introduce topic 3?
Sure. The topic I wanted to talk about was the sort of erosion of truth within the government, of what's going on right now in terms of being able to believe the information that is presented to the American public as nonpartisan, professional information, and the issues right now going on across the board for government in terms of a disagreement, I'd say, from the administration as to what constitutes truth and what's an acceptable way to present information. We're seeing this in a whole bunch of different levels of government. We saw this with the assessment, apparently, that was made of the bombing on Iran, that I guess there was an assessment made that it wasn't enough to stop the nuclear program of Iran. It just delayed it, and that wasn't good as a response. So apparently the people who made that assessment are fired. But you see this also in things like the Smithsonian, where they're trying to erase history, essentially, to change it, to change any mention of certain things, to change portrayals of information. But you also see this from labor statistics. So the economists who compile all the data of all the economy in the whole country, one of the things they look at is labor statistics, is how many people are hired, how many people are fired, how many people are looking for work. And when the job numbers came out that Trump didn't like, instead of going, oh, that sucks, I wonder what's going on to cause the job numbers to be lower. No, instead, it's let's fire the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because clearly the person at the very top of the organization spent all of that time using all of the different statistical methodologies and research and all the work that goes into compiling those statistics. Clearly, they decided, yeah, we're just going to present terrible numbers out of the blue. No, that's not how these things are created. That's not how these statistics are arrived at. And the numbers are down now for August. So the whole point is you've got sort of an erosion of what constitutes truth. It's happening at the Department of Energy in terms of the environmental report that was presented. And then you also see it in the NASA budget, where they're trying to essentially sunset the satellites that detect CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. We're just looking at how much CO2 is emitted from farms and all that stuff. And also they were looking at plant health. On various levels of government, the data we have come to rely on to understand the world better is being steadily undermined all across the board. You see it in hurricanes too, right? The most recent example I can think of was actually those floods down in Texas, where they fired the meteorologist person who was supposed to interface. They fired like the night meteorologist or whatever, so there was a delay between when the information was most impactful and when it was actually told to people. There was a delay between the warning. That delay, that window of delay, posed certain issues, right? Because these floods happen really fast. The whole point is that across the board, there's just this really weird situation going on where the only truth that seems to be allowed is the one that makes the Trump administration look good, right? But what they decide good is really subjective, right? In terms of the value of the information to the American people. And we saw this happen during COVID too. Do you remember during COVID when in the early stages of the pandemic, it was like, oh, it's going to be a week. Oh, it's going to be a month. It's going to go away in the summer. There's not that many people who are affected. If you don't actually take the information that's presented to you seriously, if you make it seem like it's some kind of hoax or it's designed to make you look bad, but you don't actually take the information presented as like real, right? Then there's a delay between the information being presented and the actual action being taken on that information, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. I think we can establish that the way to find truth is not, how does my hair look? Bad. You fired. Next person, how does my hair look? Bad. You're fired. Next person, how does my hair look? Oh, it looks very good. It's top rate, high quality hair, very luxurious. Not fired. So we can establish that is not the way to find truth. But in that case, I guess it arises what is. But the idea that a whole department is that their job is to collect Bureau of Labor Statistics. Where was the directive that told them to over-report the unemployment? It was behind the scenes. That kind of conspiracy thinking, I don't think it's going to get you very far. It just doesn't add up. The short of it is, conspiracy theory thinking isn't going to get one very far. Like the parable, you judge a tree by its fruits. You're the tree, and part of you is your epistemology, your way you determine what is true, and how many people who think the moon landings are fake end up CEOs of company. Not to say that's the be all end all, but like philanthropists in the government, summiting mountains. They plant the flag at the North Pole, and they're like, shout out to all those moon truthers. We've never been to the moon, and I'm going to be the first person there. You know, that even sounds a little bit inspirational. He thinks, he doesn't think that anybody's going to go to the moon, and he's just gone to the North Pole, and he's going to go to the moon. But wait, you didn't see that was a fiction. That was a fiction. The questions of skepticism, I do not think, can be effectively answered. It's just a facet of reality from a priori thinking. In philosophy, it's like solipsism could be true, but you live your life in attempting to find synchronization between yourself and the world. So just the idea, so if the Bureau of Labor Statistics faked the employment report, then how did they do it? By what means? For what purpose? Not just, they're on the dole, man. I think you need a better explanation. But you're probably talking about more issues, too, and greater and more consequential issues. But that's where my mind goes when we consider the case of skepticism. Yeah, then by what? Then how did they fake it? Why did they fake it? How did they get away with faking it? What is their incentive to fake it? Those would all be the questions, not just, they faked it. It's fishy, man.
Yeah, that's the whole issue I have right now with all these levels of government where they're going, they're just making it up. It's just not real. And the question was, all these people were hired. They all applied for a job. There's got to be some level of oversight. And the real issue I have with that kind of thinking or statement from the top of the pyramid in terms of the power structure is like, you're the oversight, right? You're effectively the boss. So you're saying that you're so bad at your job of overseeing these institutions and auditing the work that they do that you don't even believe your own employees? Because we've seen this happen before with Trump, especially in his first term, that press conference in Finland where I agree with Russia's spies instead of the U.S. intelligence community in that one press conference that was just incredibly bizarre. It's like, if you don't agree with the work product of your own people, what do you agree? What is the standard for what is actually true for these people? Because you would expect, I think this is where there's all this confusion right now for the economy of businesses wanting to invest in the United States and actually making like concrete, we're going to do it kind of statements and actions to that effect. How do you predict for the future if the future is so unpredictable? If the information that you're getting has this sort of like pall of not being credible from the very tippy top of the power structure, right? Like people look at that data, the labor statistics, economic data, because they believe that the information they're being given is the truth. And you make decisions about investing based in large part on assessing risk, right? How risky is it in the current work environment, labor environment, business environment, corporate environment, whatever you want to call it, for me to take this risk, to actually spend the money to do a thing? Like, what is my expected return on the investment? If you can't trust in the statistics and the data that underlies that decision, then the best decision for a lot of these companies and a lot of these investors is don't do it, right? Sit it out. wait until we can actually agree something being true. That's in large part why the United States was considered, I don't know so much right now, but was considered such a great place to invest because for better or worse, the data that people were given, you would expect was the real data. This is how many people are actually getting jobs. This is how many people are actually employed, right? These are the real numbers. You can trust in these numbers. And that applies all across the board. There's this weird disconnect. This is what I don't get of Trump going, oh, we need tariffs to force companies to invest in the United States and to manufacture in the United States. But you're missing the whole part of that argument that they're not going to invest or manufacture in the United States if there's a level of unpredictability and uncertainty of all the inputs for manufacturing. Like, why would I make a widget in the United States if the cost of the materials to make that widget fluctuates 8 times in a month? Like, how do I predict anything? How do I predict how big my factory should be, how many people I should employ, what the market's going to look like in terms of demand? If there's no actual stable, if it's quicksand, right? If the ground is always sinking beneath me, it's always moving like a moving light in the sky. Have you ever seen the red pointer for a cat?
Yes, we discussed this on a recent podcast.
Exactly like that, though. But that people look to government data as the standard of truth, the standard of certainty, because the information ostensibly is vetted, right? It goes through a whole bunch of series of reviews and is audited and is accountable, we hope, to oversight, to the public's truth-seeking mechanisms. Congress, the federal government has its own auditing. We expect a certain level of professionalism, expertise, stability. And if we can't expect that from the government, who can we get that information from? What are the facets in our society that will give us like actual, verifiable, truthful information that we can make decisions upon? Because that's what this is. Like, government is an instrument, it's a tool to help people better navigate the world. It's in the preamble. We the people, order to form a more perfect union, general welfare, right? Ensure justice and domestic tranquility. The general welfare part is pretty important to understand what the welfare is, to provide for that general welfare. And that's where the truth seeking part of government really plays a big role. And if you take those different pillars away from NOAA for hurricanes, from with NASA for the environment, with the BLS for labor statistics, with the Smithsonian for history, right? If you do that across the board over and over, you erode trust, you create greater uncertainty, and we're left wading in these like really weird waters of not knowing what truth is when presented information from the government. And that's a weird place to be.
So the preamble, and the preamble goes like this. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, etc. So, form a more perfect union in order to, here are what they want to do, establish justice, that was number one, and then ensure domestic tranquility was number two. Even before, provide for the common defense. Not that they listed this, not that it was like a MySpace top 5. And the first is the best, but
yeah, they all matter.
Yeah, they all matter. And why do they say domestic tranquility? If things are like, if I can drive down the street and nobody is gonna come out swinging against me, if I have a predictable path to the Burger King where I don't think I'm gonna get interdicted along the path, I'm much more likely to go to the Burger King. And if I don't, I won't go.
We don't do press gangs in the United States like the UK used to do, where you're just a male of a certain age just walking along the street and a bunch of people will show up. You're going to serve on a ship now for 18 months. Have fun. It's no.
Yeah. No. Gotcha. You're in the Navy now.
yeah, that doesn't happen anymore.
Didn't work. And maybe that's why we fought the War of 1812. In fact, I think it actually is in large part some of that, yeah.
There has to be some baseline for what truth is, for what information is valid, is credible, that we can rely on for acting. Because the U.S. is a huge country, right? It spans a whole continent. It's got thousands of, not thousands, but
From
it's got
sea to
From
shining
shining
sea.
sea.
hundreds of bases, territories, protectorates, like so many agreements. And the whole point here is like an institution that big. Actually, probably the best metaphor I've heard was the Titanic, right? If we can't agree that there's an iceberg directly in front of us, then we're just passengers on the Titanic as it's getting hit by an iceberg because we can't agree that the iceberg just hit the ship, right? Like we're disagreeing that there is an iceberg. And you can bury your head in the sand and just go, "La, it's not happening," right? But if you get rid of all the climate data and you get rid of all the instruments and the ways and the technologies to actually understand what's going on in the world, it doesn't mean that stuff's not going to still happen. Hurricanes are still going to keep slamming into the United States coasts and the South, and tornadoes and all these things. They're still going to happen. It's just going to be a different response. That's ultimately what the outcome is, that if you reduce our ability to understand what the world is and what's happening, then it affects the ability to effectively respond to those things that are happening, because you're responding after the fact instead of preemptively, is the big one. For example, this whole thing with FEMA, where all purchases over 100 grand have to be personally approved by the head of Homeland, Kristi Noem, like that, all purchases over 100% have to be personally signed and approved. That leads to delays, right? Because there's an information lag between when Noem receives the information and when the information is most pertinent. And you saw that with the floods, right? Floods are happening. They needed to make certain hiring decisions for the phone response, right? For people calling in, "Hey, I need help. There's an emergency. Can you help me?" And the contractors not being, there's a level of uncertainty of whether they would be paid for the work that they were being asked to do. And if you have that level of uncertainty of people not knowing if they're going to be paid during an emergency, guess what happens?
Then they're less likely to do the work. They probably will go and do other work.
If you don't delegate a certain amount of authority to the people that are ostensibly hired to manage emergencies during an emergency, if it all has to flow through the very top, then it limits the ability of government to act. That's where it becomes really important that the cabinet secretaries actually believe in the truth and actually have some understanding of what reality is. Because if they're leading the way, but they don't actually agree on what the way is, where are we going? What's the direction?
I think in sales or in various realms of business, there's a degree to which perception is reality. And what I mean by that is, in The Art of the Deal, Trump wrote something about how when the concrete was a quarter of an inch off, he called the people personally. So the quote I'm referencing is from Art of the Deal, written by Trump. Here it is. 11 a.m. Frank Williams leaves, and we turn to a discussion of the demolition work at Trump Park. Andy tells me it's not finished, and that the contractor has just given us a $175,000 bill for quote-unquote extras. Extras are the costs a contractor adds to his original bid every time you request any change in the plan you initially agreed on. You have to be very rough and very tough with most contractors, or they'll take the shirt right off your back. I pick up the phone and dial the guy in charge of demolition at Trump Park. "Steve," I say when I get him, "this is Donald Trump. Listen, you've got to get your ass moving and get finished. You're behind. I want you to get personally involved in this." He starts to give me explanations, but I cut him off. "I don't want to know. I just want you to get the job done and get out. And listen, Steve, you're killing me on these extras. I don't want you to deal with Andy anymore on the extras. I want you to deal with me personally. If you try screwing me on this job, you won't be getting a second chance. I'll never hire you again." My second concern is the laying of floors. I ask Andy for the number of our concrete guy. "Okay," I say, only half joking. I'm going to take my life into my hands now. Concrete guys can be extremely rough. I get the number 2 guy on the line. Look, I say to him, your boss wanted this contract very badly. I was set to give it to someone else, but he told me he'd do a great job. I walked this site yesterday, and the patches you're making aren't level with the existing concrete. In some cases, they're as much as a quarter inch off. The guy doesn't have any response, so I keep talking. Nobody has the potential to give you more work in the future than Trump. I'm going to be building when everyone else has gone bust. So do me a favor, get this thing done right. This time, the guy has a response. Every guy on the job is a pro, he says. We've given you our best men, Mr. Trump. Good, I say. Call me later and tell me how you're doing. You might also say of something, oh, it's only off by a quarter of an inch. A lot of what people focus on, what people devote their attention to, and in particular whether something is good or bad, depends on the initial rollout of the communication. Like when he redid the Commodore Hotel. He saw it in his mind, there's that station over there, people in nice clothes get off it, there could be this beautiful building here. If we just change the idea of it, by changing the facade and the construction, idea first leads into the reality. So he's had a good deal of success in business. So maybe his epistemology is, like, if I lead with the idea, I can achieve this other goal. And doubtless there's a goal.
And I get that, but it's a sort of quintessential thing I've seen for American capitalism in particular, that there's much more of a focus on the facade, on how things look, than on how things are. You see this a lot with the choices that cities decide to spend their money, right? They spend their money on making the place look really nice, making it good for tourism, advertising it, but there's a lot less money spent and a lot less resources allocated to things like addressing homelessness, ensuring that people have enough access to medical care, ensuring that they're following all the environmental protections. That's manifesting right now in government, where if you just present the data or the information to make it look good, but ignore the reality that maybe the situation isn't as good as you're trying to make it look, then you're not making the necessary investments to actually fix or address the problem. So if the problem is for the jobs reports that businesses are unwilling to hire because they cannot adequately prepare for the future or predict the future due to the tools that they use to do that being in flux, especially the tariff environment, because it's so unpredictable right now. The appeals court just said that the tariffs were, a whole bunch of the tariffs are illegal. And so the Trump administration, it's not even clear if they can impose those tariffs. So how do you know, right? Do I buy 100,000 of whatever this product is now, or do I wait? Do I wait a month, 2 months, a year? How do you make reliable choices about the future? Because that's the thing. Once you've made a purchase and paid for that tariff, like, you're on the hook. If I buy 100,000 widgets at $2 and then the price of widgets goes down by $1 in next week, right? I'm out a huge amount of money on those widgets. What do I do? How do I recoup this cost? And so that's a really big deal for any real manufacturing, any real production, because the supply chain is, for some of these things, there's no domestic supply chain for some of the board game stuff and some of these other toys and a bunch of these other, like, the whole supply chain somewhere else, right? And tariffs make a big difference there. There has to be a baseline for what reality is and that people can agree with it. Right now, there's a huge degree of uncertainty being put forward by the Trump administration for reasons that are not always so clear, right? I understand why he doesn't like if the job numbers look bad, but I don't understand how you arrive at the conclusion that the job numbers look bad, so that means that the economy must be just fine, because that's the things we hear. Oh, everything's great, the tariffs are great, everything's going swimmingly, and it's no, there's trade-offs. Reality doesn't just adhere to what you want to believe. I think that's what I see the issue is, that this administration, for some reason, is unwilling to even entertain countervailing narratives about what's going on. Do you know what I mean by countervailing narratives?
Yes, an idea or a way of looking at the world that runs contrary to one's own, or runs contrary to the established.
And if you don't even allow for disagreement or argument to arrive at a better understanding of what the truth is, then the truth is just whatever you say it is. It just creates this like fog of uncertainty on what the future looks like. Because if you go, say for instance, for wildfires, if they just take away all the tools and ways to detect wildfires and like smoke and the environmental impact of wildfires, they go, oh, there's just no problem. People can feel it, right? The smoke clouds the air. It affects their breathing. Wildfires like are real. They burn down forests and structures and buildings. If you don't take seriously the information that's presented about the degree of danger posed by wildfires, then it affects things like how many firefighters get hired, where the resources are allocated, how seriously the efforts are to address the problems in terms of mitigation efforts, or what happened with the immigration enforcement up in Washington, where they stopped an entire fire crew to get, I think it was 2 people. And it's, what if they were actively fighting a fire? Like there was a fire happening like right in front of them and they were actively fighting it. And the priority for whatever reason of the government was, oh, we're going to arrest these 2 people in the middle of fighting a fire. There has to be some level of recognition that you don't go to the absolute extreme for it can't be this like maximalist thing for stuff like immigration enforcement and other things where the trying to address one problem makes other problems worse, right? It creates adverse impacts. Like there has to be some acknowledgement that there's cause and effect, that if you do one thing, another thing can happen.
Or as the 45th president put it, the treatment cannot be worse than the disease. The treatment cannot be worse than the disease. So I'm referencing that I saw him on TV in March of 2020, and he said something like, the cure cannot be worse than the problem. And I think he was referencing a tweet that he had made March 22nd of 2020. We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. At the end of the 15-day period, we will make a decision as to which way we want to go. Mondays with Mike.